actually, why don't we get going? I want to make sure that we have ample time for Carol to talk with us and to us, I guess, a little bit. So let's open with prayer. Gracious God, we gather this morning in this sacred place, looking for you and looking for you in each other and in our hearts and in our minds. Be with us, journey with us. We are here and listening. Amen. This morning, I'm Holly Sturker, and as a member of the Faith Formation Commission, I am just hosting, which means my job this morning is to kind of keep track of those who are zooming in, and I see that you are muted, which is a good way to be at this moment. If you have a comment you want to share with us, please raise your hand. I will be watching on the screen, or put something in the chat and I will be watching the chat as well. And those of us in the room, feel free to jump in with conversation whenever Carol invites us, because Carol is leading us this morning. I regret to say that I missed last week in the somatic healing conversation. So I was here for the first week of why. I missed how last week, but I am here for what, if that's the right order. And Carol Francisco is with us this morning to continue leading us, as many of you have been with us for a couple weeks now. So I'm going to just turn it over to Carol.
Thanks, Holly. Many of you know I'm a member of St. John's, and I've worked in racial justice with somatic healing. So I've combined those two modalities. They don't always go together, but in my case, and in the case of many others, we've combined a healing modality with racial justice for obvious reasons. If you want to know more, as you all know by now, I love this book, My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies, all of our hearts and all of our bodies, Resmaa Menakem. I know many of you have read this book in the book club and other book clubs, and that's a great start. So the arc for Faith Formation since September has been racial justice. And we've heard from many of the various teams, many of the ministries at St. John's are doing racial justice in different ways. So the arc, as Holly said, in November has been, for Faith Formation, has been our why. And so we all heard from the racial justice team their why, and from many of the community members on why racial justice and why somatic healing with racial justice. Last week we talked about what it is. We scratched the surface. There, of course, will be more coming. And today is how. We'll talk about how. And for the rest of Advent, we'll talk about how. How you can participate in your own somatic healing experience and personally experience release of pain and trauma. Last week, I was asked my definition of trauma. We were up against the clock. We're committed to ending by 9:50 or before 9:50. And I wanted to give you my definition. It's not the same as anyone else's definition, and it's certainly not going to be the same as an emergency room practitioner. But trauma comes from the Greek word meaning wound. My definition is trauma is cellular blockage or memory in the physical or emotional body caused by severe pain, injury, or shock. So people overuse these words as they become trending. Trauma is something big. It's a big deal. And that's not to minimize whatever you feel might be pain or trauma in your own body. But stubbing your toe maybe isn't trauma, but anything that brings a shock to your system or emerges, and you didn't, and this is sometimes how trauma emerges. We didn't remember that it happened. And we go, oh my gosh, this happened to me. And we get to name it and feel it. So from the word wound, Rumi, Persian poet, said the wound is where the light gets in. He also said, what you are seeking is also seeking you. So given that, trauma is an opportunity to heal, to let the light come in. Sunlight, light is the best disinfectant. And release us into the person we are meant to be. Because trauma will hold us back. It creates armory, meaning a shield. It's actual physical. A practitioner can feel it in your body, but it's also energetic and emotional, where we keep people at a distance. We're a little aloof. We're a little superior, maybe. We protect ourselves with our mind and our intellect. Okay. So we'll talk about how today, how to participate in healing trauma and racialized trauma. I will also talk about it for the next 4 Sundays of Advent, beginning next Sunday, where we will have Marjorie D. Previous, a good friend of mine, here to demonstrate somatic practice. Very simply, she's a yoga practitioner and has worked with trauma release. And we'll do gentle movements. We'll be seated and meditation and breath work. Very simple. So these are practices in the next 4 Sundays that you can experience and take home and have for your very own and use. My work will be focused on heart-head coherence, bringing the two together so that we're not chopped off at the head and not in touch with our intuition, our body, and our sense of who we are. So I like to say, your body is your messenger. Are you getting your mail? We often are not when we're cut off and suppressing things before they even surface. So on the buffet table over there behind Barbara, there'll be 2 things as you leave if you'd like to get this book, Gather, by Dr. Octavia Rahim, and these little cards about our Advent work. The postcards will talk about who, what, when, and where. So on one side, it talks about the next 4 Sundays. Next Sunday will be Marjorie, and then I'll have a Sunday, she'll have another Sunday, and then I will go, and the dates are on here. Healing Within, Spiritual Practices for All Bodies. As we prepare to receive God's incarnate love in the Christ child, come and participate in practices that align our minds, bodies, and spirits with wholeness and well-being. We will inwardly digest portions of the appointed Advent scriptures with gentle movements and contemplative breathing practices from a seated position, all are welcome. So consider who in your community of family, friends, and people that might benefit from learning some of these new practices or might need the community. And please invite them. The other side of the postcard talks about our Advent read, which is Gather, and our soup suppers and book discussions, 5:30 on Wednesdays, for the 4 Wednesdays in Advent. Come prepared, following the reading schedule above. So this little postcard will tell you what pages to have read before each meeting, if you can. Following the reading schedule above for conversation that invites readers to be free to pour the medicine of joy, harmony, and abundance from the ladle of your heart into the bowl of your being. Bring a copy of the book, including your journal notes. Don't worry about the journal. The journal is included in the back of the book because you're invited after these contemplative readings to write things that came up for you. And mine is pretty full. And there's loads of space to write. So it's all in one. On the first page of Octavia's book, she writes, gather, and the definition. Noun, a part of a garment that is drawn in or pulled together. Verb, assemble, accumulate, or bring together from scattered places, draw in, come together, get together. So it's a very lovely book to read and very simple. There's a statement on one page, and the next page, she just fleshes it out a little bit. And the reading is more of a meditation. And then you're invited to write. So I love page 66. It says, the woman you plan to become, be her now. This person that you're thinking, that's what I'm going to be when I grow up. This is who I'm striving for. This is what I'm aiming for. The man you plan to become, be him now. Again, invite your friends. So this is Christ the King Sunday, the end of the liturgical year. And a perfect time to start now, leaving behind the old that no longer serves us, and bringing in, embracing something new that we can build on. In the season of Advent, we prepare our bodies to receive the incarnate love of God. So we can use this book as a daily devotional to get to know how our bodies respond to trauma, to pain, to racialized trauma, or simply to become more aware of our own bodies. As you do these meditations, notice your body's reactions as you clench or release. So normally we just read things and file them away, and all too often we suppress feelings that come up. So see if you can, in this reading, drop more into your body. And then come and share that with us on Wednesdays. So that Advent becomes a time of sacred practice in this community together. So please bring people who need community and who are ready to think about racial justice and how they can make a meaningful contribution and begin healing themselves on that path. So at this point, are there any thoughts, concerns, ideas you might have, suspicions? or questions? Yes, Barbara.
Why do you think people resist this so much? You know, as I'm listening to you, I think this really sounds, interesting or whatever. I've done like tons of therapy after traumatic events, which has saved my life in some ways because I process my reality through talking and I figure out what I think by hearing myself say it. Why do you think people, there's such a resistance to this?
That is such a good question. And I'm talking about myself here as well as the culture at large. Fear of exposure almost seems worse for people than fear of death. Well, what if they find out what I'm really like? Being vulnerable is very, very hard. And not that we should be vulnerable willy-nilly. We should be thoughtful and wise about how we project ourselves and protect ourselves. But being vulnerable is extremely difficult. Also, we're trained as a culture to suppress our feelings. This isn't how people act. This isn't how men are. This isn't how you act if you're a woman and a professional. We suppress our feelings because they're painful, and we feel like if I allow myself to feel this, I might start crying and never stop. Have you ever had that where you're crying and then you're laughing? But you will stop because feelings emerge to be released. That's the purpose. Feelings and emotions that we tend to that feel unpleasant, that we don't like, they emerge to be released. That's the purpose. And generally what happens is they come up and we're like, whoop, and we go to the head. This is tough work. This is the toughest work there is, as hard as therapy is. We are letting our body's wisdom inform us as people did for millennia, as humans did. And now we are in a culture where we're all need to act in a certain way to be accepted. So feeling feelings is hard, and it's also unbelievable. So how many times have you in therapy or you've heard people say, this emerged for me, but I can't even believe it happened. I'm not even sure it happened, or it's no big deal. They did this to me, but it's no big deal. I'm fine. I'm all right. It wasn't that bad. This is how we're trained. Don't make a fuss, keep it moving, keep doing your job, keep being productive. Thoughts?
Along with those things, I think the thought of losing control of yourself. You believe that you can control your emotions, control your reactions, et cetera, et cetera. So now it balloons to the surface and may create something completely unfamiliar to you. You lose control and you don't know what to do. So the thought of losing control of the familiar.
You're absolutely 100% right. We're trained to be very boxed in and controlled because who knows what will happen if I let this. Has anyone ever lost control in public? Okay. Remind me to tell you about being in the Edina post office one day, 9 months pregnant. It's a bottle of wine story. We have, and Minnesota has been so good to me. I love it here. And it's a hard place to be culturally expressive.
You think?
Yeah.
Mhm.
We don't want to be seen as that crazy person who's emotional, and not all emotion is bad. I mean, sometimes we're joyful, and those emotions we can keep going. But the pain that's buried in our body is blocking something. It can cause physical disease. I know that to be true. So there's a lot of benefit to do this work, or even begin the work, or even start becoming aware of our bodies, checking in. How do I feel right now? How's it going? Not just in the mind. What do I have to do? I've got to get to church, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. Just how are you? How am I doing? Yes, Judy.
Carol, can you talk about the two things really? What are some symptoms, some expressions in our that we might be experiencing as that we're maybe not even aware of? What is happening in our bodies? What tells us that we have these blockages, that we need this healing? And then what are we likely, as we go through this process, what are we likely to feel and experience in our bodies, in our minds, in our emotions? And realizing that these could be very different for very different people, but I assume there's some typical things or common.
Okay.
I love that you looked at the clock.
I better check in
How
here.
much time we
Get
got?
everybody to church on time.
Carol, could I give an example?
Yes.
So I really like your definition of trauma because it's about like, is your pain, are your wounds keeping you from doing things? And that's how I've experienced trauma is like, you know, I'm in a situation that reminds me of past trauma and I simply cannot do something, like be it some sort of social thing, usually that. Yeah, my body just like is not letting me, like whether it be anxiety or just like, I don't even know what feeling. It's just like I cannot make myself do something because my body's trying to protect me from what happened in the past. So that's one way it can look.
That's one way it can show up. And this is somebody who's paying attention. Because most of us would go, oh yeah, I don't really like those events. I'm not going there. I don't, we disconnect. Our mind is geared to protect us, but it can only go so far. So this is a very well-educated group of people. A friend said to me one time, you know what your problem is? And I said, please let me know. And she said, your mind, your intellect. It has taken you very, very far and gotten you where you need to go, but it can only take you so far and you're stuck. So the mind tries to protect us. It's primitive, it's limbic, and it doesn't want us to experience pain. But sometimes we move past something, or we can move past something. So that's one example. The list is so long, Judy. I wouldn't know where to begin. But you'll notice if you start suppressing emotion, if you burst into tears during an insurance commercial, chances are something's going on. If you feel rage for no reason. Go ahead, Keith.
I was just about to say that I know for me, and I'm trying to talk around the school here, but for me, it's anger. There's something that's going on with me right now. That when I think of it or it starts to come up, I get very angry because of what it is. And I suppress it or try to suppress it because I don't want that anger, like I was saying earlier, to erupt like Mount St. Helens. So when I try to suppress, when I'm suppressing it, I get a headache and my blood pressure goes up. So I need another way or a way to release that anger. A consistent way to release that anger. I used to, play basketball and do other things. Some of those things I can't do anymore. So I need another way.
Thank you, Keith.
James Baldwin said that to be a Black man in America is to be angry almost all the time.
And if
Yeah.
you show it at all, it's like,
Yeah.
the stereotype, there it is, like, yeah,
It's dangerous. to show
yeah,
it.
that's really hard.
Yeah.
Because you should be able to show your anger, like, it's unfair.
The quintessential Minnesota expression, which I absolutely want to scream, and it's been said to me more than once, is after you say something, well, tell us how you really feel. And you want to say, I just did.
Yeah.
And clearly that is a put down. In other words, you are, either the person can't answer the argument or they just aren't comfortable with it. Tell us how you really feel. That is, I see red. Anyway, I
Yeah,
think,
it is a put down.
oh God,
In
yes.
other words, you're going too far, you're too much. Black men are too much, women are too
Yeah.
much, men are too much. Men are toxic. I mean, it's hard. So if you feel stuck in any way, I dislike that word because it's, if you feel that you cannot move forward in the area of relationship, love, money, fulfillment, something's going on. Yes.
So I was thinking, when you were talking about trauma and what constitutes trauma. And I certainly not trained, and I cannot tell anybody whether they're experiencing trauma or whether you shouldn't feel trauma on that. But in thinking about people who experience trauma, small children live with no skin. They are traumatized all the time, right? And what do we do as adults? Well, we teach them how to build a skin, right? How to stop being, right? How build a cushion around yourself so that trauma, terrible things happen. People, they talk about how the onlooker phenomena, where you see something terrible happening and it's like, well, I'm just watching TV. No, it's happening, but you have become so desensitized, right? Whereas small children, and that's the story of the emperor's clothes, right? It's the small child who has to sit there and say, well, wait a minute. And to me, as a Christian, what I like is that Jesus said, you have to come to me as a child, right? So get rid of that cushion, get rid of all that past training, and at least in your relationship to God, right? Don't put up these false barriers. Don't put up all this, whatever you need to protect yourself. Tear all that down, because it's not, it may protect yourself in the rest of the world, but in our relationships with God, it's just keeping us away. It's just separating us. And so, yeah, so that's kind of what I was thinking about, is that when you look at small children and how they handle trauma, well, they experience trauma, and how as a small child, you were, I think I was at a conference last week, and the lady was talking about, she was flying in and there was a 2-year-old, or wasn't even 2 years old. And he was on the plane and he didn't want to be seated, but you had to be seated. And he was, you know, and everybody was feeling sorry for the mother. And she said, but she was saying that small child, you know, they're not even old enough to maintain memories, but they will remember the trauma of being, you know, prevented from doing what they wanted. And that's kind of what we all come into adulthood, and it really, in our teenage years, that's when it's really, you know, that's when everybody learns, no, you don't do that. You don't want to be on the outside of the group. You need to follow this.
And not only are kids taught to have a thick skin and not, you know, have outbursts, but they're also taught, well, that thing you're scared of, that thing that hurt you, that thing you don't want to do, well, that's stupid. You don't want to go on that roller coaster. Whoa, that's silly. Roller coasters are good. Like, don't trust your gut. Like, the world is the way I see it. I'm an adult. You're a child. You don't know. Like, I was such an anxious kid. I went to the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum in Branson, and I was literally traumatized by the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum. I had nightmares for like a year,
Oh my God.
and no one could understand. Like, it's not even a scary place for most people, but it doesn't matter. Like, trauma, like everyone has different trauma for different reasons. Who knows why?
And it's exactly why when somebody is telling you about their traumatic experience, it's that, you know, trust them.
Mm-hmm.
That's their experience. I'm not going to tell you that, well, that wasn't traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't know. And you know, people who are, that's part of the problem with that the Black, they become so thick-skinned, right? That, you know, what do they call it? Microaggressions.
Yes.
Yeah, they have all these microaggressions thrown at them and they do not react to them because, you know, how else are you gonna get through the day? But their body does, right? And then,
Yeah.
and so they suffer from high blood pressure and shortened lifespans.
Okay, I'm gonna shut up after this, but I have a story that's very specific to nursing that I think matters a lot.
Please.
So the thick skin, especially of Black folks, that becomes very literal in the medical community. I was told I was learning how to do IVs in the hospital, and the nurse said to me, oh, that guy's brown. He needs a thicker needle for IVs. And I said, excuse me? And she was like, oh yeah, if someone's Black or brown, they have thicker skin.
Oh, wow.
You have to use a bigger needle when you do IVs. And I was like, what? No, there's no scientific evidence to. So she's been, you know, poking Black and brown people with bigger needles than they need, like her whole career. That's horrible. And then I was like, okay, maybe she's just weird. No, my father-in-law believes that. He is still a paramedic. He's for the St. Paul Fire Department. Well, he just retired, but for years and years, he believed that too. He was like, yeah, Black people, we just automatically use a bigger needle. They have thicker skin.
Wow.
So yeah, the white fragility, like there's the opposite side of it where it's like literally thinking Black people have thicker skin.
And along with that, the belief that Blacks and Browns have a higher tolerance of
Yeah.
pain
Mhm.
is still prevalent,
Oh, yeah. And that has real life consequences that are devastating to watch.
especially with mothers, expectant mothers.
Mhm, mhm.
Thank you. I'm so glad all of this is being recorded. It's important. And Dan, you said something like, well, I'm not a professional, but you are a human. And you do get to say, as you expressed, if somebody's expressing emotion, just trust them and just be there for them. That's one thing we can do for another person. And we can do that same thing for ourselves. So Judy, trauma can manifest in many emotional and mental ways and many physical ways. There is an emotional component, I believe, to every ailment. So that would be a good hour conversation, but thank you for asking that. But if you start becoming aware of yourself as a being and not just a head who thinks and is trying to get through the day, you'll notice things. To your second question, what to expect in the next 4 Sundays? These Sundays, first of all, it's group work. It's not individual work. It will be gentle. I really believe there'll be beautiful experiences, but we'll see. Something will happen. I don't expect a lot of immediate release. However, after a somatic experience, you might even later that day, later in the week, start noticing things look more beautiful, or you're feeling things that seem to be unpleasant. Again, they're meant to come up and out. They're toxins, better out than in, right? Did you have a comment, Keith? Okay. So does that help? Anything else in terms of? So here's what I know. Where 2 or more are gathered, Jesus said, there I am. So we'll have this experience as a group, and you may find yourself more open. You'll find yourself changing once you make friends with your body, instead of feeling like it's the enemy that you have to contain and control and manage, and let it heal you. Your body wants to inform you, wants to give you access to intuition. No, I shouldn't go on that roller coaster ride. So it's children that we can teach them to pay attention to their intuition. And it's the child that still dwells within each of us that has been hurt. How would we treat a precious 3-year-old that we had charge of? We could start treating ourselves that way and be gentler and not demand so much perfection of ourselves, outer perfection. Does that make sense? So your homework, should you choose to accept it, people's bodies and your own bodies will give you all sorts of wisdom and information if you'll listen, especially when people talk about politics, race, religion. So what you can do is, what you can start doing for yourself is just start noticing how you're feeling when you clench up, when somebody says to you, oh, how do you really feel? How does that feel? And anger is talking to us. Usually it's telling us that our boundaries are being violated or have been violated. So family gatherings, i.e. Thanksgiving gatherings, are golden opportunities for learning how your body is responding. To notice what's happening, to notice your body and how it relates to trauma with regard to ageism, sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, etc. And you don't need to jump into the fray necessarily. But for now, just notice how you feel when you clench, when that vagus nerve is on high alert, right? And your psoas muscle gets involved. And when you release and relax and feel like, okay, I'm good, I can release these feelings, or so-and-so agrees with me, and it doesn't matter whether they agree with me or not. Notice your body. Anybody? Yes, please.
Quick question, as you're talking about this, my mind went to the fight flight response.
Mhm.
Is this connected? Are they connected?
Yes, yes. Fight, flight, or freeze, actually. And when we're not tapped in, we freeze. We can't move, and there's a bus coming towards us. So we want to stay aware of our body. Also, As people get older, and by that I mean beyond 21, if we don't start paying attention to our body, we're likely to fall because we're just not paying attention. Has anyone ever done that? In your head, shoveling snow, slipped on the ice? We have to remember that we have feet and they go into the ground. That sounds very basic and simple, but it's really helpful. So notice the clench and response and then come share it with us on Wednesdays because we, Father Craig and Marjorie and myself, want to learn from you about all of this. So next Sunday, I hope you'll come to see the talented and powerful Marjorie Grievous take us into some breath work, movement, and meditation. Gentle, slow, nothing's expected of you. You can get up and leave if you wanted to. And she'll be kicking off Advent. The following Wednesday is the Advent read, the soup and the read. And please consider coming and participating. And as far as what you'll experience and what will happen to you, I don't know. My observation is that they tend to be good experiences and we become deepened. And in Advent, we're welcoming the incarnate Word, Christ, the King, into our very temples. We are the temple of the Holy Spirit. So,
one experience I've had doing this kind of work, and you really feel stupid, is you're in a group and, and you talk very personally with a lot of vulnerability, and everyone else in the group doesn't. And that can be embarrassing. That can be like you feel you went too far. How do you handle that?
what was it Coco Chanel said? Oh, beauty begins when we decide to be ourselves.
Mhm.
So Barbara, I understand, and we have to decide, are we in life all the way or
Mhm.
not? Are we moving forward? Am I moving into beauty and more connection with people or not? It's important to protect yourself, but it's also important for me not to protect myself from made up stories.
Mhm.
Oh, Eliza might not like me, so I better not say hi. I mean, in the scheme of things, who cares? So I'm often the person that asks the questions in the room that no one else will ask, and that is vulnerable. And believe me, you are the teacher of people in that room. Without a doubt.
Yeah, I agree with you. I make these decisions every time I preach, and I preach next Sunday.
I know you do.
So I decide, what is most personal, is most universal up to a point. But you can't, anyway, those are, I make those decisions in a little bit bigger room, which is always.
If you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space.
Mhm.
And with that, Holly.
Well, thank you, Carol. And thank you all for coming. And we look forward to the Advent series, both in this room before worship each Sunday and on Wednesday evenings. So let's close in prayer. Gracious God, heal us, connect us, body, heart, mind. You are the great healer and the great connector. Amen.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
And thank you for those online. listening.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.